Part 1. World War II was the deadliest conflict in human history, claiming the lives of approximately 70 to 85 million people. However, the events that led to this global catastrophe began long before the first shots were fired. To understand World War II, we must first look at what happened after World War I. When the First World War ended, the victorious nations imposed severe penalties on Germany through the Treaty of Versailles. Germany lost around 13% of its territory, all of its overseas colonies, and its military was reduced to just 100,000 soldiers. The country was also forbidden from having tanks, an air force, or submarines. On top of that, Germany was forced to pay 132 billion Goldmarks in war reparations. In 1929, the Great Depression made Germany's situation even worse. Banks collapsed, businesses failed, and millions of people lost their jobs almost overnight. Inflation became so extreme that paper money was worth less than firewood, and some families even burned banknotes to keep warm. When a nation is suffering from poverty, humiliation, and hopelessness, people often begin to support anyone who promises a better future. At that moment, Adolf Hitler emerged as a powerful political figure. A former soldier, he blamed Germany's defeat on Jews and communists and promised to restore the country's pride, strength, and prosperity. In January 1933, Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. Within only 2 months, he passed the Enabling Act, giving himself almost unlimited power. The law was approved by 444 votes to 94, effectively ending German democracy and establishing a dictatorship. Hitler then began openly violating the Treaty of Versailles. In 1936, he sent German troops into the Rhineland, despite the treaty forbidding it. France and Britain chose not to respond. 2 years later, in March 1938, Germany annexed Austria, and once again, the Western powers took no meaningful action. Soon after, Hitler demanded the Sudetenland, a region of Czechoslovakia with a large ethnic German population. He assured Britain and France that it would be his last territorial demand in Europe. Trusting his promise, they agreed to hand over the territory without even consulting Czechoslovakia. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain returned home believing he had secured peace for our time. However, only 6 months later, Hitler broke his promise by occupying the rest of Czechoslovakia. His word proved to be worthless. Winston Churchill later described the Munich Agreement as a complete and unmitigated disaster, and history would prove that he was right. Fighting. Part 2. The War Begins, 1939 to 1940. By the summer of 1939, Europe stood on the edge of another devastating war. Adolf Hitler had already broken the Treaty of Versailles, annexed Austria, and occupied Czechoslovakia. Although Britain and France had repeatedly chosen diplomacy over confrontation, it became increasingly clear that Hitler's ambitions would not stop. Then, in August 1939, the world witnessed one of the most shocking diplomatic agreements in modern history. Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a non-aggression treaty that surprised nearly everyone. Publicly, both countries promised not to attack one another. Secretly, however, they agreed to divide Eastern Europe into spheres of influence. The biggest target of this secret agreement was Poland. Germany would invade from the west, while the Soviet Union would enter from the east. Poland suddenly found itself trapped between two powerful enemies. On September 1, 1939, Germany launched its invasion of Poland with approximately 1.5 million soldiers, supported by thousands of tanks and aircraft. Instead of relying on slow trench warfare, Germany used a new strategy known as blitzkrieg, or lightning war. Fast-moving armored divisions, coordinated airstrikes, and highly mobile infantry overwhelmed Polish defenses before they could organize an effective response. Only 16 days later, on September 17, the Soviet Union invaded Poland from the east, carrying out its part of the secret agreement. Surrounded from both directions, Poland fought with remarkable determination but had little chance of survival. After about 5 weeks of fierce resistance, the country was defeated and divided between Germany and the Soviet Union. Britain and France had guaranteed Poland's independence. After Germany refused to withdraw its forces, both nations declared war on Germany on September 3, 1939. World War II had officially begun. Surprisingly, the first several months of the conflict were relatively quiet on the Western Front. Although Britain and France were technically at war with Germany, neither side launched a major offensive. French troops remained behind the heavily fortified Maginot Line, while German forces stayed on the opposite side of the border. This unusual period became known as the Phony War, because despite the declarations of war, very little actual fighting took place. The silence ended in April 1940 when Germany invaded Denmark and Norway. Denmark surrendered within only a few hours, while Norway resisted longer but eventually fell under German control. These victories gave Germany valuable naval bases and greater control over the North Sea. On May 10, 1940, Germany launched a much larger offensive, attacking Belgium, the Netherlands, and France simultaneously. The French military believed the main German assault would come through Belgium, just as it had during the First World War. Instead, German armored divisions advanced through the dense Ardennes forest, a region that French commanders believed was unsuitable for tanks. This unexpected maneuver completely outflanked the Allied defenses. Within just 10 days, German panzer divisions reached the English Channel, cutting the Allied armies into two separate groups. The expensive defensive system France had spent years building was effectively bypassed. Hundreds of thousands of British and French soldiers became trapped near the French port of Dunkirk. Facing possible destruction, Britain organized one of the most remarkable rescue operations in military history. Over the course of 9 days, hundreds of naval vessels, fishing boats, merchant ships, and privately owned civilian boats crossed the English Channel to evacuate the stranded troops. Against all expectations, approximately 338,000 Allied soldiers were rescued. Although the evacuation was considered a miracle, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill reminded his nation that wars are not won by evacuations. Britain had saved its army, but the battle for France was far from over. German forces continued their rapid advance. French resistance weakened, and by June 1940, France officially surrendered after only 6 weeks of fighting. To humiliate France, Hitler ordered the surrender ceremony to take place inside the very same railway carriage where Germany had signed its own surrender at the end of World War I in 1918. It was a carefully planned act of revenge and symbolism. With France defeated, almost all of Western Europe was now under Nazi control. Only one major power still stood against Hitler. That nation was Great Britain. The next chapter of the war would determine whether Britain could survive alone against the most powerful military force in Europe. Part 4, America Enters the War and the Pacific, 1941 to 1942. By the end of 1941, the war in Europe had become increasingly intense. While Germany continued its massive invasion of the Soviet Union, another conflict was about to transform the war into a truly global struggle. For years, Japan had been expanding its empire across Asia. It had invaded Manchuria in 1931 and launched a full-scale war against China in 1937. As Japan occupied more territory, tensions with the United States continued to rise. America responded by imposing economic sanctions and restricting Japan's access to vital resources, including oil. Japanese leaders believed that war with the United States had become unavoidable. They decided that the best chance of success was to strike first and destroy America's Pacific Fleet before it could interfere with Japan's expansion. On the morning of December 7, 1941, hundreds of Japanese aircraft attacked the American naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The surprise attack lasted less than 2 hours but caused enormous destruction. Battleships were sunk or severely damaged, military aircraft were destroyed on the ground, and 2,403 Americans lost their lives. More than 1,000 sailors died aboard the battleship USS Arizona, which remains underwater today as a memorial to those who were killed. The following day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed the American people, calling December 7 a date which will live in infamy. The United States immediately declared war on Japan. Only 3 days later, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States, bringing America fully into World War II. From that moment, the conflict truly became a global war involving nations from nearly every continent. With much of the American Pacific Fleet temporarily disabled, Japan launched a series of rapid offensives across Southeast Asia and the Pacific. Within just 6 months, Japanese forces captured the Philippines, Hong Kong, Malaya, Singapore, the Dutch East Indies, and Burma. The fall of Singapore shocked the world. It had been considered one of Britain's strongest military bases in Asia, yet it surrendered after only a short campaign. It became the largest surrender in British military history. By the middle of 1942, Japan controlled an enormous empire stretching across the Pacific Ocean. However, its rapid expansion would soon face a serious challenge. American intelligence officers successfully broke important Japanese naval codes. They discovered that Japan was preparing to attack Midway Island, hoping to lure the remaining American aircraft